a system that I recommended the other day in the paper, which is about work permits and caps. And so you say to people who are high skilled, look, we're pretty easy on that because this is added value and there's not that many coming in. But for low skilled work, you want to have a real system that says to the company, you first of all have to demonstrate to us that you cannot find the workforce to come and work in your company here in the UK first. Then we may grant those papers. And that can be done very, very quickly. So the first thing is, I'm generally swayed hugely by this argument that says, if we control this, we will do more to help them in the short term get their earnings back. And there's one other point I want to make about this, which I am critical again about some of the ways that the companies have worked. I think some of the British companies have got, over the last 10 or 15 years, quite relaxed about the idea that you don't have to train people much, because you can go and find somebody much cheaper, much easier by advertising in Eastern Europe. This again is damaging. Why do we have such a low productivity economy? Because people don't get trained to get above the low skilled area of work because they can't break through. Universal credit will help that, but we need to control that access, because that then forces British companies to start investing in human capital, which they have forgotten about in some cases. Not all of them, but for some time. The best companies haven't, but some of the other companies are getting away with what is quite wrong, and I think it's time to invest in British capital, human capital.
So would you be confident in saying that in 10 years' time you think that the lower deciles in British society are going to be better off as a consequence of Brexit?
Yes, I do. I believe they will be. I believe they, in terms of the UK economy, will be. I believe that this flexibility gives us something that we are... I think the UK is genuinely a free trading nation. I think we are probably the most free trading nation of significance. You know, there are other nations smaller than us, but the most free trading nation on the planet, more so than the United States, because we genuinely kind of believe in it. We always have done, you know, the home of Adam Smith and everything else. This is really what we want. And I think we can send an example to the rest of the world that the world economic problems are hugely still set around the fact that we just don't believe enough in the idea that even if you don't have a trade balance with somebody and they sell more to you, you will still be better off, ultimately, by having open doors to goods and services, because it benefits people all the way down the chain. That was exactly the principle of Adam Smith, which is the moment you start putting up these barriers and cartelling, you damage the very people at the bottom end, because they don't get a say any longer in what happens. So my view about this is we can lead the way on free trade globally and in the European Union. And I actually genuinely believe this could be just the kind of thing the European Union needs to say, it's time we made some changes here ourselves. Let's do that free trade deal with the UK, and let's look again at the way we treat Africa and all these other nations. Why are people... I had this row, by the way, in Berlin. I went to do a debate, sorry about this. I went to do a debate in Berlin during the referendum. You know, I think it was kind of me versus the rest of Berlin, but it was... I think I won. Anyway, the point was, on the platform, we were sitting there, and the German politicians on there. There was one particular politician, quite a senior guy, and we got into this discussion about, they said, why should Britain stay? And each one gave their view, and it was going to come to me at the end. And he said they should stay because the biggest problem that faces us right now is migration, and what you don't understand, he said, is that the population of Africa is very young, and you just, you know, they're just going to want to come to European countries, and we have to be together to stop this process and to manage it and everything else. And he'd finished, and I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't disagree with you more. Do you know the reason why they're coming here? It's because the European Union has had the most desperate policy through the Common Agricultural Policy, subsidizing stuff which they can grow and do far cheaper. We stop them doing it. We don't let them sell their goods to us. If you don't let them sell their agricultural goods to us, how in heaven's name were they ever going to develop their countries? They have no money to do it. No wonder they want to come here. Why don't we use free trade to give them the support and the money and buy some goods from them for once? Then they're really going to go. He didn't agree.
I don't feel I can carry on with all my caveats here, because I think there are questions that you want to ask, but I want to ask one final thing, which is that last week the CSJ and the Legatum Institute published a paper which recommended how Theresa May should handle the future of our negotiations with Europe, which are basically saying, don't negotiate, just tell them what we're going to do. So far the Prime Minister seems to be more or less following this blueprint to the letter. Are you pulling strings?
No, I have actually. We did obviously present these papers to the government long before. I'm sure others have done the same. The point we're simply making in the paper, though, is this, and it was, Peter Lilly was the last Secretary of State to do a trade deal on on tax, myself on migration and how do you make the policy work, particularly for academics. And by the way, at the All Souls presentation that we had a seminar, when the academics were asking questions, I put this is what we should do for migration. And I said, and at the top end for academics, scientists, all these, I said, all of you, I said, you'll come and go pretty much as you can now, because we shouldn't be interested in that at all. That's what's always happened. The work permit system, basically you'll get your block work permits and the government just doesn't even bother. And there was silence in the room, and then one academic said, well, hang on a second, are you saying that even if we have this system, we can get anybody we like in and all the rest of it? I said, yeah, if they're coming in to do work in academia and studies, etc. at university, these are absolutely, there will be no limits on you that you'd even notice or blink at. He said, well, why don't you announce that out now? And I said, well, because I'm not in government and I don't run the policy. But I said I certainly would do. And then that struck my thought that actually what characterises the papers is not do nothing and just say this is what you want. It's to say to in the European Union, if we want to have this control over our borders, we should pay respect to the European Union a little bit by recognising that if we are to demand that we're in the single market, this puts them in a dilemma and a difficulty, and it's not going to happen. So if we're going to do this, the game of, well, we can go and negotiate, they're not going to negotiate on this because they can't. So rather than going to them and demanding special pleading, and which is just going to end up embarrassingly in a kind of quagmire of row and argument, if we understand what's in their interests and what's in ours, then this makes it a far easier process to go and say, look, we're not going to demand that. We're not going to be in the single market, because that's difficult for you. We do want to control our borders. But what we do want to do is leave as friends, allies, cooperating and trading. So on the trade element, let's sit down and talk about how do we make free trade work between the two of us. After all, we've been doing it now for God knows how many years. Surely this is what we should want, both of us, and figure it out. And if we don't want to figure it out at this point, well, we can carry on after we leave and come to some agreement. But basically, make it as easy as possible for the European Union to say, do you know what? Actually, this would make sense. So I always say, in business, anything else, the definition of a deal is when both parties walk away from the table saying, I got something really good. And if we can think like that, that's what these papers say. Just make it clear, we're not going to try and bully them or threaten them, and they not us. Let's just leave as friends and make this very easy.
Just as you did with George Osborne, I'm sure.
Exactly.
I'm sorry that I've eaten into some of the time. Let's take 3 questions at a time. The gentleman behind, the lady in front, that gentleman, this lady. That's 4, sorry, if you think I can't count you right. Would you just say who you are?
Hi, John Ashmore from Politics Hub. Would you be amenable to a return to government if it was offered?
Hang on, 4 time. Yes. Remember the law.
Hi. Just a question. So, universal credit. I remember back in 2009 when you launched Dynamic Benefits and being in a room outside Conference Centre, how exciting it was that it was coming in. And I guess this is a question now that 7 years on, and now that you're no longer in the sort of restrictions of talking on behalf of DWP, and you can talk from a social justice agenda. Would you do you see the welfare system as a huge sticky plaster? And ultimately, at the end, would you consider, is it the best way to spend the money by topping up low pay and housing, or do you think we need to start to move the social justice agenda to investing in supporting employers to pay a higher minimum wage and investing in housing supplies so we can reduce the benefit budget?
Thank you. Ms. Layton.
Hi there, I'm Drusilla Summers. I've just got a question relating to, I'm actually on the committee for the Conservative Workers and Trade Unionists. And I was just wondering how you think we could improve our engagement and our relationships with trade unions and kind of show that we actually do support them and they can be a vehicle for good for workers.
Thank you. And there's one more lady, was it a man? I can't remember, sorry, which. Yes.
Hi, I'm David Finn.
Colleague.
Dave Filling from South Leicestershire, I'm chair of planning and Leicestershire Hate Crime panel. But my question is around mental health. We've seen an increase in mental health from all ages, from young people to old people, through family breakdowns, poverty, financial pressing stuff. So what do you think the CSJ, local government and national government can do to help alleviate that problem and stop it spiralling into a vicious circle that we know it is?
Shall I deal with those?
Yes, could you bear to go back into government?
Look, it's not on the cards. When I resigned, I did tell myself that I am resigning and I want to get on with some other things, and I did want to come back to the CSJ, and I really wanted to continue to push some of this agenda, a little bit freer from government. I don't know what the future holds. If somebody really desperately wants something in a few years' time, well, they come knocking on the door, I'll have to think about it. But I'm not, at the moment, going back into government, and my choice is I want to get on and change things, hence the papers that we've been writing and being a bit freer to speak. But I genuinely want Theresa to succeed. And I don't say that with any side at all. I think if she fails, we all fail. If she succeeds, the UK succeeds, and we just have to get on with it. And so I say to some of my colleagues, let's give her the support that we can possibly do so. Universal credit, and how do you manage the change? The point about universal credit is now we have to change the way we're rolling it out, because the digital way, using cloud saving and everything else, now makes it incredibly efficient, and so that is now how it's going out. It's successfully doing that. It'll be, I think, genuinely remarkable. I think this is the most efficient way to help, for the very simple reason you then control the way in which you understand how businesses are paying their salaries, who they're paying and what levels they're paying, because every day you meet that challenge when you're having to every month rather, register what their salary increases or falls are, and we know them monthly now as opposed to the way it's being done at the present through tax credits. So my sense about this is the government does need to have that ability to be able to put a floor underneath and say, we need to make sure that people themselves are not going to fall below a certain level, and we can allow them, but at the same time to help encourage them to move up. If we were abandon that completely and just left it to the employers, then you have an awful lot of policing to take place around this, and it's quite difficult, as has been seen already on some of the minimum wage problems that we've faced. So that I think universal credit, because of its nature of being so in control of what's happening in work, will allow us to very visibly look at what companies are doing and understand better how they're making and managing their payments. So I think that system will work really well, and actually will incentivize new job creation, because you can start low hours jobs just to experiment and see whether you need to invest money in that job. So, and people can take mini jobs just to begin with to see what it's like as they tip their toe back in the water of work after being out of work for a while. University allows that to happen while still being in touch with the job centre, etc., and going on. So I think it's a humanised way of doing it rather than just an economic way. And I do believe that for too long we have looked at people as part of that economic equation and not seen them as slightly separate, in the sense that the concept of human capital has more value than just the money that it earns or it discharges, that there's a wider range, and we need to figure out how you get to that.
Mental health and trade unions.
Mental health, there's huge, big changes in mental health, and there's a lot of debate about this. We're starting to do it. On the treatment side, we've been really bad at it. It's been the Cinderella of the health service, but I think the governments are now more focused on this. And the truth is, this whole business of talking therapies, getting to people early, making sure that you have much easier access. Lots of people are reluctant to go into treatment, so I was actually recommending that we set up treatment centres in job centres. I wanted to do this if people have difficulty. You know, we've online services to get them into chat rooms where they're not identified, but they start to hear that other people have similar problems to them, and that's a way of breaking down their rejection of going in. So easing that process in, but we have to invest more as a simple fact of life in mental health services. And also, you know, we set up a thing called Disability Confident, and one of the things that I was really after was trying to get more people with disabilities into work, because work is a really good support for people, particularly with mental health problems. Work actually helps things like 60% of all the mental health problems in the UK are depression and anxiety, and these are unbelievably treatable conditions through proper talking therapies and a combination of work. And we've just not got our heads around that. So the best way to help is by doing that, and this is why I wanted the reform of the system that allowed people to take work and not lose all of their money at this particular point, but find an easy transfer into into work. And the TUC, look, the best thing we can say to the trade unions is, actually what we really do want is to see people's incomes and livelihoods improve. And I'm very happy to engage with trade unions about this. I think sometimes they've got too politicised. One thing I would say to them about this, I would tomorrow come out and say, you've been worried about minimum rights for working people on departure. I would give you an absolute guarantee. I'd write into the face of any 72 bill, you know, getting rid of the 72 Communities Act, I'd write into the face of that we will guarantee minimum workers' rights at the levels that exist here within the EU at this particular point. I'll guarantee that in statute for you, because we should have no intention of trying to drive down on those. We have the most flexible workforce in Europe, and there's a balance. So we don't need to go there. There are also other things you need to repeal and change in regulations, but you don't need to go. And there's been this myth that you're suddenly going to go and attack workers' rights. Well, let's put a floor under that and say, absolutely not. I give you that guarantee. Now let's work to make Brexit work for all of us.
Thank you. I think we'll just trade on goodwill and take 4 more questions. This gentleman here, this lady there, the man at the back, this lady here.
Right, Michael Farmer. CSJ is famous for its Breakdown Britain report on family breakdown. It seems successive governments haven't really done too much about the family breakdown, which gets worse, and as I heard about mental ill health there, there's all sorts of ramifications from it. Do you think, what would you recommend for Theresa's government to do about family breakdown?
Thank you. Hang on a minute.
What does it look like for next generations if we don't get all that you're talking about right?
Question is, what will it look like for next generations if everything that IDS plans works out? Sorry, did someone take away your microphone? The gentleman at the back, and then
Ian, Liam Fox said at a Fringe meeting yesterday, when David Dimbleby finally announced that we'd voted to leave the European Union, he broke down in tears because he was so emotional. I wondered if you had a similar reaction.
I did in the other direction. I don't suppose you care. This lady here, sorry.
You've correctly identified the issue of gaming and employers using that to not upskill workforce. What will you do via CSJ to make sure that they're held accountable?
Thank you.
Right. Family. Yeah, we did do quite a lot towards that issue of family breakdown. There were some things that we managed to get through. I thought the marriage tax allowance was a beginning, small beginning, I know, but there was a lot of resistance at the Treasury to this. But it was a kind of a foot slightly through the door to try and get it right. I always said the problem with the argument was that everyone gets guilty when you start talking about family. You know, is it the province of government to get involved in this, and it's nothing to do with us. Actually, the truth is, if you think about how important family is to everything that we do, to our beginnings and to our end and our middle of our lives, the support from family, the nature of nurture, the way we develop, it is arguably, you can argue, the single most important thing of everything. It dominates our economy, it dominates our mental health issues, our physical health. So really, we do need now to take this real opportunity with Theresa's arrival to just rethink this whole idea of what happens to family and stable families staying together and giving their kids the right chance. And we talk a lot about children in families. In truth, we forget that the elderly are also part of this issue. And one of the things I've argued is one of the reasons why we've got so much pressure on people having to move out and go into care homes is quite often because of the levels of family breakdown have left elderly people with nobody really to care or look after them, and that has now become an institutional issue. So family breakdown has an effect at both ends of the life scale. So I had been asked to create a family test so that we could test all government policy against it and see to what degree does this make it more difficult for families to stay together rather than the other way around. So I was in charge of the family test. I was then promptly told that we won't make any progress on deciding what that family test is because there was disagreement about why we should actually have the family test. So for 12 months, I worked on it, but wasn't able to produce anything. I would immediately go back to the family test, and I would say, let's start by asking ourselves this question. Not how do you advantage families, married couples that stay together, But actually, how do you ensure that the state hasn't actually tilted the equation in the opposite direction and bring the pendulum back to the middle? Because I think if all things are equal, people choose to live the most stable lives they can. And then you're able to look after those that are incapable of doing that for various reasons. More family counselling is really important. We underestimate the effect of counselling families on the edge of breakup. You can really stabilise large numbers of families, yet we just couldn't get money put into this, and I was desperate to do this because it really affects people in the lowest incomes particularly. You know, counselling can really stabilise their lives. That helps the next generation and improves employment. So I would reintroduce the family test. What does the future look like? I've just been criticising all of the experts during the whole of the Brexit campaign because they told me what the future looked like, and I said, I don't believe you because nobody knows. So anyway, now I do know what the future looks like. I don't. All I will say to you is, I hope and believe that if we are careful about this, if we really care about family policy, if we care about the right kind of support through universal credit and the other areas of the welfare state for those who have difficulty, and we can move them on up, then I think we'll get a more balanced society. And if we get this right as we leave on the European Union and get these incomes right at the bottom end and support that process, I think that stability, the gap between the ABs and the rest, was never more starkly illustrated than during this debate over the European Union, and I think it was kind of a wake-up call to us. So now we need to focus our effort down on that, definitely bottom 5 deciles, not in a here's some money, but what have we got to do to help that process of progression work for them. So how do you make an economy, capitalism, work for the bottom 5 deciles in a way at the moment that it's been working incredibly well for the top 1 decile? So that needs to change, and I think that's our big challenge, and that's what the CSJ is going to be on with. I've gone and lost the point. Accountability, sorry, before I come back. Yes, how do we keep the accountability? Yeah. Well, actually, I think this is the point about universal credit. It opens the door to what's happening monthly in companies. We know straight away what they're up to because the levels of payment monthly will give you a fantastic indication. And we can collect that data because it's now held centrally. That's the beauty of this. And we'll be able to say straight away, you know, there are people gaming the system on a temporary basis because automatically the salaries will do this, and that will tell us exactly what we're up to. Right, okay. I didn't cry, no. And I didn't see Liam cry, to be fair, but then again, there was a lot of usual kind of celebrations when elections are won. All I will tell you is that I left it was the most fascinating thing. I did early 10 o'clock with Dibbleby, and then I left, and I was going to go to bed, but I actually went to vote leave and sat watching the television, and I couldn't move away from it because it was just riveting. And when it was all over, when the BBC finally announced it, I don't know why we always wait for the BBC. Sky had called it, ITV had called it, you know, my son had called it, and then the BBC finally called it. And it's like it's kind of the national thing that we have to wait for the BBC. But having called it, there was obviously all the kind of cheering. And I actually just rather quietly left the room, went downstairs, and all I remember was that it was a lovely day that day, wasn't it? And the sun was literally just breaking over the top of the city, just kind of reddish and really warm already. And I stood on Lambeth Bridge, and I just thought to myself, this is going to be the biggest change that has happened to Britain, arguably socially, pretty much since the back end of the Second World War. And I felt really moved by the idea of it, but at the same time, I could just see the breadth of the challenge that was coming. And I just felt, I was struck by a sense of insignificance when faced by this challenge, but this determination that this is really what public life is all about. It's about having those big moments of change and then rising to them. And I just have this one sense in my mind, is that I have such an incredible belief in the British people that I really do believe, and this, in a sense, I know this is just about, you know, do you have optimism or don't you? I genuinely believe that we are on the edge of a renaissance, that the UK is about to break through in the way that it did in the 19th century to lead the world in all the best things that we do in demonstrations of decency, tolerance, free trade, cooperation. You know, I think we're going to become incredibly influential, not the other way around. And I think being a member of the EU has actually trapped us slightly in a straitjacket. I think it's time for us to grow again.
can only hope that IDS and all the rest of you are right. There's a lot that's depending on it. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, and thank you all for being such a marvellous audience.
Can I say a huge thank you to Jenny Russell and the James Smith as well.
Very, very quickly.